Support for Disrupted comes from the Connecticut Office of Film, Television, and Digital Media.
From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. Terence Blanchard is a multiple Grammy Award-winning trumpeter and composer. He's performed as part of Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. He's also composed the scores for many of Spike Lee's films, including BlacKkKlansman. In 2021, he became the first Black composer to have an opera performed at the Metropolitan Opera. This hour, we're talking with musicians who are changing the ways that we think and experience opera. Later in the show, we hear from classical singer Julia Bullock. She's developed a multimedia project that includes music inspired by songs of enslaved people. But first, Terence Blanchard. He's executive artistic director at SF Jazz and composer of operas including Fire Shut Up in My Bones. Terence, it is wonderful to have you on Disrupted.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm sorry I'm a little under the weather, but I'm happy to be here.
You grew up in New Orleans, which is a city known for its people, its culture, and its music. What was it about music, about playing the trumpet, that really drew you in?
Growing up in New Orleans and hearing music, it always seemed to be a very emotional experience, whether it be joy or sadness, being at a parade, for example, being at a picnic, hearing band play, or being at a funeral, and I think the power of music to elicit those emotions was something that struck me as a little kid, and I grew up in a house full of amateur musicians. My mom's sister played piano and taught voice. Her first husband at the time, who passed on though, he sang. He sang with my dad, who also sang, was a baritone. My grandfather played guitar. So, there was music in the house, and it just seemed to be a natural thing. And I remember when I was a kid, just sitting at the piano trying to bang out little melodies that I heard on television because it was something that gave me joy. And I remember hearing them say, well, if he's going to do that, let's get him some lessons. At least he could play something we could listen to.
I think my first memory of the power of music, particularly in New Orleans, was seeing the original version of Imitation of Life. Okay. And seeing this funeral procession and wondering, which was so different from where I grew up, how are people finding joy in music in this painful time of a funeral? But I really understood it, Terence, is also a way of, this is us, this is our culture, this is our way of saying. Music brings us together and we can share that experience. How has music allowed you to connect to both that history and that culture? But you are really charting a path forward that others have not.
I grew up in the church and hearing people sing, gospel music or classical arias in that setting, not only drew me in emotionally, but there seemed to be a history with it, and growing up in New Orleans, having both that experience and then hearing the traditional jazz bands play in the French Quarter, but going home and listening to Miles Davis and Clifford Brown and hearing this progression, not only was I tied into the culture, but to me, the culture was about moving forward. It was about progressing. It wasn't about, oh, this is how we do this and it'll forever be this. No, that's how they did it then. What is our version of that now?
And I hear in that an appreciation for what came before, an appreciation for how others created and worked together, but also this impetus to create new and to reimagine those ways. You have composed scores for dozens of movies, including films like Malcolm X and BlacKkKlansman. You played trumpet for Do the Right Thing. And your work, for me, has never been afraid to confront these challenging moments or to use music as a way of connecting people to experience and understanding. Is doing that work in terms of composing for film, do you see that as different from some of the other performances that you do? Or is it all tied to figuring out what you can do next to keep telling the story of the power of music and connection?
Well, it's a little different because the purpose of the music. If I'm working on a film, my job is to help the storyteller tell his story or her story. That's my job. And I get a lot of pleasure in that because most of the people give me room to express myself within that context, you know. But when it's me telling the story, it's a totally different ball game because I have free reign about how I want to tell that story. I become the director, so to speak. Whether it's an album or an opera, where I have more control of the artistic vision of any of those things. But having said that, people always, well, not people, but young composers sometimes would think that writing film music is limiting, and it's not. It's not, because it's all about the challenge, about how to help convey these issues. Because listen, when you talk about something like a Black Klansman, that's an important story to tell. When you talk about the Buffalo Soldiers, that's an important story to tell. So it's less about me and it's more about the story and conveying that story. And, when I did The Woman King, for example, I'm thinking about my grandchildren and my great grandchildren being able to watch this and understand how important it is for them to know the story. So I'm trying to create music that's going to last. It's not going to have a stamp on it in terms of period. I want it to be something that's going to be able to stick around for a long time.
You've created a legacy of music that will last, a legacy of music that the power of it to me is that your music resonates with multiple generations of people, that there are songs that I can listen to with my mother, I can listen to with my teenager, and be able to connect to that history and that trajectory that doesn't feel dated, that doesn't feel time bound. And you are always innovating in that. I'm going to be really honest with you. I didn't know a
Mhm.
lot about opera as a little Black girl growing up in Virginia. I knew about Leontine Price. I knew about Paul Robeson, knew a little bit about Jesse Norman, but
Mhm.
never imagined a Black person being a composer of opera. And for you to think about that legacy and let's try different genres because it is rooted in those cultures and experiences of expression is
Uh-huh.
amazing to me. You have now composed two operas. Talk to me about moving into that field, or, maybe for you it wasn't about moving into, but just doing a new thing. What was that for you?
Scary. Yeah. I mean, it was terrifying. As a matter, I always tell a joke when Jim Robinson, who's the director of most of the productions that I've done, when he came and asked me to write an opera, I leaned across the table to smell his breath to make sure he had the right person. I'm like, come on, man, me write an opera? But since I've entered into that world, I've fallen in love with it. You know, I've been telling all of my friends, stop thinking opera, because sometimes we have so many of these caricatures that float around in popular culture that people see opera and they think of some guy with horns and a staff standing there singing at the top of his lungs. And that's the furthest thing from the truth. Opera is really it's the highest form of musical theater you could ever experience, because the singers are so accomplished. The orchestras are just amazing. Everybody in the production, from the lighting crew, from wardrobe. I mean, it's the best of the best. And entering into that world was frightening. And I remember I called my teacher, Roger Dickinson, to get his advice. And one of the things that he said was, don't write opera, tell a story. And that helped me out a great deal, because in the back of my mind, when I was writing opera, I had the history of opera in the back of my brain. Now, one of the things that I always have to clarify is that when people talk about me being an African American composer doing opera and being the first to go to the Met, right? One of the things that I always have to clarify is that I may have been the first, but I'm not the first qualified. That's a very, very important distinction. There were many composers who had come before me. William Grant still is one of the ones that really pops into my mind because, I was doing an interview for a major network and they brought out this ledger, man. And in the ledger, William Grant Still's name was in there 3 times where he had been rejected. And some of the comments that was made about his music was just, ridiculous. Especially since I forgot which opera it was now, but I heard one of his operas in St. Louis prior to that interview. And I didn't know it was his opera, right? And I'm listening to it going, man, who wrote this? I'm thinking it's something current, contemporary, because it was so hip. Harmonically, you could hear the influences of jazz, but the thing was written in the 30s, right? So that tells you about the brilliance of this man. So it's an amazing thing to me because I feel like the opera world has been missing out because of all of and there was some women's names in that ledger as well, right? So there's so many experiences that they've been missing out on because people are trying to uphold what they think opera should be. And there shouldn't be gatekeepers, not when it comes to art. There shouldn't be gatekeepers. You allow people to express themselves in the way that they know how, and it kind of broadens all of our experiences, right? And the thing about it that blew me away was, when we did the opera at the Met, there were so many people, African American people, and people of all different races that showed up, and really supported the project. But here's the most important part: a lot of them, it was the first time they had been to an opera, right? But the most important part was they bought tickets to other productions. You know what I mean? So now they're broadening their experiences. The Met Hall itself was demystified for a lot of people. It wasn't an intimidating thing. People came in and had a beautiful time and had a great time experiencing this art form, seeing themselves on that stage. And that's probably the most important thing about what we do and whether it be film, whether it be opera, whether it be jazz, no matter what it is, we have to be honest about who we are and where we come from and allow that art to speak to the public because it's not just about African Americans, right? It's not. Those are universal stories, right? It just so happens that African Americans were the people who felt like they didn't have a relationship with the culture like you were talking about. But now so many people are experiencing it and they're learning more about these very, very talented African American singers. One journalist upset me so bad because he said, do you think your opera is going to influence young African Americans to sing opera? I'm like, bro, you haven't been watching opera. Black people have been singing opera from the beginning. You know what I mean? From the beginning. And I said, and here's the beautiful thing about it to me, and I hate to keep going on like this, but I think it's important to say, those opera singers are so supportive of each other. All you got to do is find one and they'll clue you in on who the other singers are, right? It's a tight-knit community because they understand how they need to support themselves because they weren't getting it from the media, right? I remember when Fire Shut Up in My Bones went to Chicago and one of the young women had gotten another role as the lead. A lot of the singers from New York flew out to Chicago for the opening just to support her. That's a beautiful thing, when you think about it, right? But it speaks to the lack of support that they have been getting throughout their careers. And we need to turn that around for sure.
Coming up, more with trumpeter and composer Terence Blanchard. He'll talk about some of the criticism that his operas have received. And later, we'll hear how art can preserve history. This is Disrupted. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're talking about the changing world of opera. We're still joined by trumpeter and composer Terence Blanchard. He'll be in Hartford on April 24th to perform selections from his opera, Fire Shut Up in My Bones. And a note to our listeners, the Hartford Symphony Orchestra is an active Connecticut public sponsor. Blanchard's opera is based on journalist Charles M. Blow's memoir of the same name. It follows Charles Blow's life and how he deals with the trauma he faced as a child. Both Terence and Charles grew up in Louisiana, but there's so much more to Charles's memoir that Terence could relate to. I asked him what drew him to the story.
Well, that was the first part. We both grew up in Louisiana, and I could relate to him. And I've always loved his writing. I've always thought he was brilliant, man. But it was the whole notion of being isolated because of who you are, in our community. And I experienced it not to the degree that he did. But I grew up in a neighborhood where wearing glasses and walking to the bus stop with a horn in your hand to go get your lessons on Saturday morning was not the most popular thing to do in my neighborhood. So I caught it from a lot of people when I was growing up, and they didn't mean any harm. I mean, kids are just kids. But the feeling of isolation in your own community is man, it can be a traumatizing thing. And to see what he went through and turned out to be this brilliant person who was doing all of this great work to uplift his community, to me is amazing. Not only is it amazing, it has to be a story that's told for other people who are going through similar things. So I'll never forget when we premiered it in St. Louis first. People were coming up to me, saying thank you, telling me their own experiences. And then we premiered it at the Met. I have this very vivid memory of this guy. I don't know his name. I was talking to some people out in the lobby after the show, and he walked up to me in tears, man. And he said, he just said, thank you. He said, because I'm a survivor. And he just walked away. And that was powerful for me because that's what we try to do. We're trying to help people heal. We're trying to help communities heal and move forward, and some of these topics are tough topics, but that's where you have to go. You have to go to the root of the issue to kind of help everybody move forward. So to me, when he said that, it was a testament to Charles's brilliance, his struggle, and what that struggle means to so many people. And let me just say this to you too. When we premiered it in St. Louis, I never let him come to rehearsal. Yeah, I was nervous about it. I'm like, let me just do this. And, when you see it, you'll see it. So when the night of the premiere, I kept going, why did I do that? Because now I really feel nervous. He may hate it. And I walked up to him after the production and we were getting ready to go up for our curtain call. And I'm standing next to him and I say, hey, are we okay? He goes, yeah, yeah. He said, this was good. He said, it made me realize I'm not that person anymore. Yeah, yeah. That hit me hard. That hit me really hard. And I was thankful for the experience and felt honored that he let me tell his story.
I just have to say, to have two Black men who are tackling these complex stories of trauma, of pain, of masculinity that too often, let's call a thing, many people in our community don't talk about because they wrap in that shame and that stigma and that sense of what it's supposed to be. To have this piece that then is relatable to everyone, but is still at the core of it, there's a beauty in telling the story. There's a beauty in the possibility of growth. And to hear Charles Blow say, I'm not that person anymore, and you helped foster that understanding for him, but for others as well. I can't wait to see this when it comes to Hartford. And even
Can I just say this something
please.
About that? The interesting thing about that is that, I caught some heat for doing two operas about two gay men. And one of the things that's interesting about it, I didn't even realize that. That wasn't the driving force behind doing those stories. To me, The stories were about people who had overcome adversity, you know? And I think it's very important to talk about because doing these stories doesn't mean that I'm closeted in some kind of way. Not at all. It means that I'm human, right? I see these people, like for example, when I did Champion, one of the things that like blew me away was this dude couldn't celebrate winning a championship, right? With openly with somebody that he loved. That's hurtful. You think about it, right? Because it's none of our business. It's really none of our business, right? And they're not coming for me. you know, People have their own things and their own, I don't know, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's a personal thing. If it's not infringing on your rights, then why be concerned about it? That's something that has never really made sense to me as a kid, even growing up in the church. That never made sense to me. It's like I don't see them people harming anyone. I don't see, and it's not just gay people, just anybody who is different than you. I don't understand it. If we were all alike, it would be a boring place to be.
And it's again the beauty of music. If everyone played trumpet, it would not be the same as what
If
happens
everybody played trumpet, I'd be going around busting people in the mouth to make sure I had a
to
gig.
make sure that you're the only one with the good embouchure, right?
Yeah, right.
But what it means to have the orchestra together or the singers and all of the pieces that make this art together in a time, Terence, where we are seeing it more difficult to teach arts education in schools or to see the beauty of theater, of film, to help people have that common sense of humanity. My last question with you, and I could talk to you about your work forever, is what is the message when you're talking with young artists or young people who are like, it's hard, it's difficult? What's the message that you send about the power of music and creativity?
Well, the art form itself, whether it be, opera, jazz, or whatever, if you're in music, one of the things that I think I always talk about is learning your craft. Learn your craft. Learn what it means to deal with harmony. Learn what it means to deal with orchestration. Learn what it means to deal with chord progressions. How those things can affect. One of the things I was thinking about is like even in the pop world, when you look at the relationship between Quincy Jones and Michael Jackson, Michael Jackson was this amazing talent, right? Unmatched. But then also you had Quincy Jones who could take those arrangements and build in that other level of exceptionalism that just took it over the top, right? Learn your craft. The other thing is don't be afraid of being who you are. You know, Miles Goodman was my mentor in the film business. And Miles, I never forget, I used to always ask him to give me lessons in film composing. But he had seen me I had already done Malcolm X and some other things. And I invited him to a premiere of, I can't remember which film, one of the films that I had done. And afterwards, I was like, what do you think? What do you think? And he was getting ready to say something, and then he caught himself and he stopped. And I go, yo, man, what's up? He goes, listen. He says, your weaknesses are your strengths. He says, my fear is that if I start telling you some things, you're going to sound like everybody else in Hollywood. He said, just keep building on what it is you're doing. Your instincts are fine. And I really appreciated that because a lot of times when we enter into something new, there has to be a certain way of doing it. But there are fundamentals. Don't get me wrong. There are fundamentals in terms of how you do things, right? But there's also that next level of how you interpret it, how you see it, how you feel about it, right? And that you can't shy away from because that is where your style and musical personality will shine.
That was composer and trumpeter Terence Blanchard. He'll be performing selections from his opera, Fire Shut Up in My Bones, in Hartford on April 24th. And just to note that the Hartford Symphony Orchestra is an active Connecticut public sponsor. Coming up, we'll hear from a classical singer about her multimedia project and why it keeps changing with every performance. This is Disrupted. Stay with us. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're talking with people who use music to explore deep questions in our society. Operas often feature epic performances full of grand spectacle, and our next guest stars in performances that evoke that same emotion. But she's also using her platform to spotlight music created by people who never had the chance to perform on big stages. Julia Bullock is a Grammy Award-winning classical singer. She's curated a program that she performs called History's Persistent Voice. It's a multimedia project that includes poetry, visual art, and music inspired by the songs of enslaved people. Julia, welcome to Disrupted.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to meet you and chat with you.
I wonder if you could share with our listeners, what is classical singing?
It's a great question. Well, I describe myself as a classical singer because I'm always looking for classics to sing. It really doesn't have to deal with the genre of the material. And so I define a classic as repertoire, either the melody and or the poetry that I want to return to over and over again. And each time that I return to it, something new seems to be revealed.
I want to talk about this multimedia project called History's Persistent Voice. It includes art, visual art, poetry, and music. Tell us more about that title and how the project came to be.
So the title was inspired by a work by a United States artist, American artist, Thornton Dial. Honestly, the first time that I saw his art was transformative. It was in an exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art had, I almost said appropriated, but they organized with the Souls Grown Deep Foundation to put on an exhibit that included some of his artwork. Anyway, this one major piece that he made was called History Refused to Die. So as I was looking at this art exhibit, I also was reading some interviews that he gave and was really struck just by the language that he used to describe art, life, the impact of art on life. And I was not expecting to have the visual artists speaking so clearly and succinctly about their life experiences, because they are the artists, at least as a part of the Souls Grown Deep Foundation, were, I would just say, poets in their own way. And the way that they were describing their lives, and a lot of them grew up during years of sharecropping within their families. A lot of them picked cotton, and then they wanted to ensure that their life experience was infused into their visual art. Again, it was about translating their experience so that other people could become close to it. And that moved me very much. So all of that then was linked very closely to the poetry and lyrics that I found from this anthology that was released post-emancipation. And this anthology it's a group of songs that was collected by anthropologists just after the Civil War. And they went to these newly freed communities and wrote down 136 melodies and lyrics, and they organized it by area in the United States. And everything that they wrote about, spoke about. And I'm not sure if if everyone was writing at the time, but everything that was in these songs, from their life experience to talking about rebellion, to resistance, and also to the resilience of the human spirit. It was like echoes of generations, and that was parallel, like the themes in that, even just the language and use of certain images like stars, was really palpable, very much connected to the visual artists from this Metropolitan Museum exhibition. And at the same time, I was looking at all of this material from the anthology of songs by people who were enslaved to these visual artists. I was also reading articles and watching documentaries, like 13th, about the connection between enslavement in the US, sharecropping, Jim Crow, convict leasing, and then mass incarceration in this country. And in one book that I read by Brian Stevenson, the really wonderful civil rights lawyer who founded the Equal Justice Initiative, he put in his book some poetry and also letters by his clients who were incarcerated, and some of them had been incarcerated since they were teenagers. And again, the words that they used and the experiences that they chose to write down to be memorialized echoed those of people who had been enslaved and those of the visual artists whose work was so deeply impactful. So that is where all the source material for History's Persistent Voice, this project that I have been singing now and we're singing now for a few years around the country, and is now getting interest also worldwide. That's where all of that came from.
I think sometimes when we are experiencing a performance, it feels effortless. It feels as if this dynamic performer has just graced the stage and delivered this performance. And I appreciate you speaking to the process, the dynamic process that happens, the complicated process that happens of what it takes to be able to connect to history, to see it through different lenses, to think about how it fits into the work that you are creating, and to do that on another level where you are also creating, engaging, and interacting with other artists in order to build this project. And this particular piece, History's Persistent Voice, is also always changing because you're thinking about new commissions and new additions. And the same way that our understanding of history is not static, this project is not static. Why was it important for you to have this as a project that could live and breathe and grow and be able to adapt and adjust as you continue it?
Well, I think you summarized it right there. It's that history, at least for many of us, whether we acknowledge it or not only leaves an impression on us, but if it's something that we are not actively considering, processing, and reflecting on, that history, it's not even a matter of it being ignored. It's the fact that we can start perpetuating some really frightening patterns that we have committed against each other over and over and over again without any adjustments being made. And, you know, I guess as a classical musician, a lot of the work that I sing is historic. And so I'm thinking about history and mapping it onto myself on a daily, hourly, minute by minute basis. And in some ways, it's like this project so beautifully allows me to engage with artists who are right by my side, some very close friends. It allows me to also honor the families of some artists who maybe have passed away recently and connect me with them. And also it allows me to connect with, and I don't really talk about ancestry very much, but it is just in my daily life, but it does call on me to negotiate in some ways with past generations. And because we don't know, I mean, just thinking about the music of people who were enslaved, we don't know how all of these songs were developed. I don't know if it was just somebody riffing while they were laboring in the field and then others joined in because they were like, yeah, okay, this is going to keep us going and keep us energized and focused, even though this is so, the life circumstance is so intensely horrible. But maybe just singing this song together is going to keep us alive. But, we don't know the names of those individuals. And I guess one other part of this project and asking for every place where we take this piece to have a new commissioned work accompany it, it allows me to then start putting more names that are recorded in history on, just to be recognized and heard. Because even if there is an anonymous work of art, it does not take away its power. But it is so, I have found it so important and so interesting to put whatever art that I'm looking at, whether it is music or looking at or singing, whether it's music or visual art, it is really enlightening to hear about the life circumstances under which that art was made.
One of the things that I think is so powerful about what you've just said is that you are creating a lineage and a pathway for other artists. And at the same time, you are connecting to and honoring those stories of enslaved people whose names we may not know, but the beauty of their craft continues with us. Those legacies of resistance and resilience, those legacies of, I can build something, even if it is just to get me through what I'm facing right now, but I can do that with other people and build community, even when others don't want us to do that. Thinking about where we are in the United States and in some ways in the world right now, where there are concerted efforts to deny history, to rewrite history in a way that is more palatable and not more accurate, and also that sense of understanding. I wonder, Julia, what you would say is the role of artists or the power of artists in these moments to remind us and to connect us.
I believe that abridged accounts of history only last so long. And eventually, unless there are great, great lengths to destroy, like really destroy everything, eventually those details in history will be revealed. And it has been proven over centuries that artists have found ways, whether they are explicit, implicit, hidden somehow behind, even if it's hidden behind a painting or subversive messages in music, history is recorded. And the human preoccupations, which we find ourselves cycling through over and over again, are also recorded and reconsidered over and over and over again. So I view it as somebody who has given myself an opportunity to call myself an artist and to live as a person who considers not only the life that I'm living, but circumstances that are surrounding me. It's a real honor, and it's not something that I take for granted. I don't know how much more I can really say about it, other than I feel the art and artists to whom I am most drawn and to whom have inspired me since I've been very young and learned more and more about them and their craft, they have also taken on that role in their lives. And so, yeah, I'm just joining in the legacy of that.
Well, you are indeed an artist, and we are grateful for the art that you create, the art that you inspire, and the art that you make possible. Julia Bullock is a Grammy Award-winning classical singer. She's curated a performance called History's Persistent Voice. It's a multimedia project including poetry, visual art, and music, inspired by songs developed by enslaved people. Julia, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Disrupted is produced by Kevin Chang Barnum, Robin Doyon Aiken, Meg Fitzgerald, and Meg Dalton. Our interns are Angelica Gajewski and Kathy Wang. Many thanks to the Yale Schwartzman Center. You can listen to all the previous episodes of Disrupted by finding us wherever you get your podcast. And you can listen to new episodes every Friday at 9 a.m. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. Thanks for listening.